Is that what you call sincere music? If so, what made it sincere? Was it the singing quality that I gave each musical phrase? Or was it my abandonment of the score when I played the middle section quicker and brought more sound to it? Let's answer these questions together. I would like to begin this lecture with a quote by the renowned pianist Arthur Rubinstein. He once said, "I interpret music with my heart and soul. I don't just play notes, I play meaning." I first discovered this quote when I was age 14 and just beginning my high school career at Hawken Upper School. During that period, I found myself starting to commit myself to the piano and music itself each day. I went to piano lessons every week, practiced daily, and I even played in a chamber ensemble. The only difference between the age 14 pianist and the present day pianist, such as myself, was that I severely lacked a proper understanding of any of the music I played. Looking back on it, the way I played the music could most likely be considered something of a musical crime. Those are Fran Weltzer's most words, not mine. At the time, I thought that if I played all the right notes, observed all the correct rhythms, and expressed the right dynamics, I did justice to the music, that I would go to my performance, perform the piece with accuracy, and my teacher would be happy, I would be happy, and we would do it all again later on. It wasn't until last year that I realized this was no way to treat classical music. It was simply insincere. Earlier this year, I stumbled upon a set of lectures given by Leonard Bernstein titled The Unanswered Question. These lectures discussed the topics of musical phonology, syntax, semantics, ambiguity, and even suggested the philosophical implications of tonality. I watched all 6 of these lectures, and after doing so, I was inspired to take a much deeper and more personal look at classical music. That is my motive for creating a lecture such as this one. What I found so interesting and powerful within those lectures wasn't just the fact that he used elaborate, complex language to communicate his points, and it wasn't even because of his unique presence within the music field. Rather, these lectures connected to me in a way that was so special. He connected each of his musical ideas and thoughts to real-life, personal experiences. That is what I intend to do here today. This lecture is directly influenced and inspired by those 6 Leonard Bernstein lectures. Before I go any further in this musical discussion, I should mention that I am nowhere near the expertise or the brilliance of Leonard Bernstein himself, and I am in no way trying to mimic or compete with his profound musical insights. Instead, this lecture is intended for me to explore the question of what sincere music sounds like, and more importantly, what it feels like. I titled this lecture, "What is Sincere Music?" because that question was something that has been bothering me for quite an extensive period of time until I wrote this. Every time I sat at the piano on any stage, the question of how will I try to make this performance meaningful for the audience always crosses my mind. Sometimes I succeed, and other times I don't. To communicate my thoughts and feelings of the music through the medium of a piano, and then projecting all of that to an audience is an incredibly hard feat. But I see it as the only way, the sincerest way, in treating classical music. From my interpretation of what I think sincere music sounds like, to authentic playing versus honest playing, to explaining my own creative process in creating something sincere, to Beethoven's unrestricted compositions, to Mozart's simplicity, to the possession of virtuosity, to Stravinsky's riot-inducing music, let's find out together within the next hour what sincere music truly sounds like. Now that it seems like I've been throwing around this term sincere music quite extensively, I think I should define it so you can all understand what exactly I'm getting at. When it comes to music, sincerity is the result of playing with poise and playing with conjunction to the human soul. As simple as it may sound, if someone were to perform or play music where they do not express their soul in some way, then it is insincere. What I discovered after studying classical music for nearly 13 years is that the music is only as sincere as the performer is. For instance, if I were to play the Brahms intermezzo in A major, such as this, versus like this, you can clearly see the difference, then I would not be playing from the heart. My playing lacks sincerity. As I started to play and experiment with the Brahms intermezzo more and more, trying to hear a sound that I thought was sincere, I found it to require a certain tenderness and something of an exclusive sound. That was the sincerity that I discovered within the piece and the interpretation that struck me so deeply. But how do I know that Brahms would have wanted a sensitive approach if I never actually heard him play the intermezzo? Regardless of the fact that Brahms lived nearly 2 centuries ago, there are always ways to discover how Brahms himself might have actually wanted us to play the piece. The Opus 118 Klavierstück, German, for piano pieces, was entirely dedicated to Clara Schumann, who was Brahms's romantic obsession, even though they would never marry. The intermezzo that you heard at the beginning of this lecture, and which is also the piece we're discussing right now, is the second piece within that collection. In an 1893 letter to Clara Schumann herself, we can get a glimpse of what Brahms wanted for the intermezzo. He said, quote, "I am tempted to copy out a small piano piece for you, because I would like to know how you agree with it. It is teeming with dissonances. These may well be correct and can be explained, but maybe they won't please your palate. And now I wished they would be less correct, but more appetizing and agreeable to your taste." The little piece is exceptionally melancholic, and to be played very slowly is not an understatement. Every bar and every note must sound like a ritardando, as if one wanted to suck melancholy out of each and every note, lustfully and with pleasure out of these very dissonances. Good Lord, this description will surely awaken your desire. End quote. But, with all that aside, I still have this theory that regardless of the markings in the score given to us by the composer and the various letters describing how the music should be played, our interpretations are still a product of a long line of musical plagiarism. Not to make it sound like us pianists are unoriginal or anything, but I find it strange how we all have the same or almost identical interpretations of certain pieces. I mean, what if there was a pianist who copied the way Brahms played the intermezzo in the 1800s, and then a pianist copied that pianist, and another pianist copied that pianist, and so on and so forth until it led all the way to me. That reminds me of the telephone game we all used to play when we were younger. The one where you would start off with a sequence, sentence, or phrase, and you would pass it on up the line to each other, all the way to the end to see what the phrase became. And sometimes there was a troublemaker who completely changed the phrase to try and make a joke of it. But I wonder, if in this long line of musical plagiarism there was a troublemaker? What if someone imposed their own flair and it changed the meaning of what Brahms wanted for the intermezzo forever? Well, I suppose there would be no way of telling who the troublemaker was or what kind of things they changed, especially so far in the future from that era. Due to the time distance, the distinction between unique interpretations and unoriginal interpretation becomes a bit hazy. Simply put, we have no idea which interpretation was authentic to what Brahms wanted or honest to ourselves and what we wanted. That's another thing. Authenticity versus honesty. You may be wondering, what does the difference sound like? I'm going to play you two versions of the Chopin Etude Opus 10 No. 6's opening. One way will be the authentic way of playing it, and the other way will be the honest way. Here we go. And this is the honest way, the way that I want, not what the score wants. You could hear that in the authentic way of playing the etude, I adhered to everything the score instructed, kept a steady tempo, and used the traditional phrasing. But in the honest way of playing it, I played it the way I wanted to. The tempo fluctuated, the phrases were completely exclusive to what I wanted, and the dynamics were what I chose for the piece. Regardless of how you might have thought the honest way sounded, I played from my heart and did what I wanted to in the heat of the moment. Now that we've gone through all that, which one was more sincere? Was it the version that was more faithful to the score, or was it the version more faithful to me? Well, maybe we don't have to pick, and we could say they were both sincere in their own unique ways. You see, sincerity in music isn't about picking sides, but maybe, just maybe, it is about finding a way for the composer's voice and the performer's voice to coexist and create something heavenly. But how do I create the sincerity in performing? Is it simply a YouTube search of the piece at hand and one quick listen of it determines my interpretation? Or does sincerity demand me to be more creative, intelligent, and willing to explore the piece's possibilities on my own? After thinking deeply about this question, I believe there is no right or wrong method to go about interpreting music, such as the ones I just listed. In fact, I think that creating a sincere interpretation of the piece is as simple as being true to yourself. It simply depends on the musician or the interpreter. But it is certainly not as easy as that. Over the years, as I studied more difficult or complex pieces, I found myself struggling with what exactly I want to make of any piece. Specifically, it is always a question of what sound do I want to create and what story do I want to tell. It is not always easy to answer those questions, especially when I am first learning it. So, I want to go through my creative process in creating a sincere and heartfelt interpretation of a piece that I've long struggled with within the past year. Mozart's Piano Sonata in B-flat major, K570. The first couple of days I spent with the sonata were completely aimless. Being that this was my first time studying Mozart sonata, I didn't have the faintest idea of what I wanted to do with it. I didn't know the sound or story I wanted to create. So, I hopped on over to YouTube, and I listened to all types of pianists play this piece. not so that I could mimic or copy their interpretation, but rather to open up my imagination and inspiration to try and create something that was true to both myself and true to Mozart. Simply put, I wanted to explore as many possibilities that I can do with the music as possible. After days of listening to different interpretations, I quickly realized that most of my time with this piece would be more listening than playing. For instance, the very opening of the sonata starts with a simple B flat major arpeggio. Excuse me. But it was so simple that it was actually difficult. What kind of things could I do with these couple of notes? How can I draw the audience into the music as soon as the first note is struck? Do I want something like this? Or something like this? I spent a considerable amount of time trying to figure out what this opening phrase even meant. I wonder if this was just a polite gesture or an invitation to the rest of the sonata, for instance. I mean, how could something that sounds so basic provoke so much creativity? I soon realized that the difficulty within Mozart's music lies within its simplicity and not within its technical demands. How can someone play something as simple as that B-flat major arpeggio sincerely, might you ask? Well, I believe that to play something like that requires us to see the notes beyond the page, beyond its simplicity, and to open up our ears to hear something more imaginative. That is what sincere music is all about, using our human-like qualities to express our creativity and generate something as beautiful as this B-flat major arpeggio. I mean, isn't that what music is all about? Looking beyond the notes and the sounds associated with them to create something special and humanly, to feel the music? Well, it didn't take me long as a pianist to figure out that if the playing lacks heart and soul, then the music would just reduce to a sequence of pitches, just one after another. During the time of studying this Mozart sonata, I read a quote by Mitsuko Uchida, who's an excellent interpreter of Mozart's music, by the way. She said, quote, "I'll tell you what the most difficult thing to do is. If I had only one note to play, that is the hardest thing in the world. If I had to go on stage and have to play only one note, that will kill me," end quote. So, it simply does not matter how many notes, loud or fast, soft or slow, if we do not put our honest expression and emotion into making each note as sincere as it can be. The next section is titled Music from the Future. I think a lot of you will enjoy this one. A couple of years ago, I found myself listening to a Beethoven sonata while I was struggling to get through writing an essay. The sonata was Opus 111, number 32 in C minor. You know, the one that starts off just like this. It opened with such a presence, one that drew me in immediately as soon as the first note was struck. It completely derailed any chance of me completing my essay. As I listened more closely and attentively to the piece, I immediately realized how ahead of his time Beethoven really was. Beethoven himself lived from 1770 to 1827 in Vienna, Austria. He lived within the classical period, which ranged from 1750 to around 1820, among several other great composers at the time, such as Mozart, Clementi, and Haydn. All three of those composers were very similar and composed music under a very similar style. In fact, if someone were to play me piano pieces by each one of them in a subsequent order, I would have tremendous difficulty in telling them apart. Not with Beethoven, however. Beethoven was simply not like them. He was a diamond in the rough. The difference of Beethoven's music versus the standard classical piano music of, say, Mozart, Clementi, or Haydn is almost remarkable. The innovative harmonies, both dissonance, percussive qualities, and the use of the sustain pedal, and a grand expansion of the piano's range were just a few things that set Beethoven apart from the average classical period composer. You would never hear any of those things within Mozart's or Clementi's or Haydn's music, for example. The Piano Sonata in C minor, Opus 111, number 32, was one that really encapsulated all of these daring qualities. The piece itself was composed during Beethoven's later years, in 1822, just 5 years before he died. In this piece, there are several different qualities that indicate Beethoven's innovative personality, to which I shall go through individually. The first one. Something that I learned from my piano teacher that resonated with me deeply is that composers compose their music with their own personal instrument in mind. A great deal of piano compositions highlights and reflects the capabilities of the piano that the composer themselves played on. For instance, if you listen to more than 30 seconds worth of any Mozart sonata, you'll find the piece to be more modest and reserved, just like the one we heard earlier. Very rarely, if even at all, do you find a Mozart excerpt that extends beyond a forte dynamic, and you would certainly not find that in his piano repertoire. This is simply because he used a Viennese piano, which were instruments that had a very light and shallow tone to them, kind of like this one. These instruments were not capable of playing loud, certainly not at the volume like the ones we are used to seeing today are able to. In addition, the Viennese pianos also had a limited range in terms of pitch, which is what I will discuss for the next couple of minutes. The Viennese pianos only had the range of 5 octaves. This is what Mozart and Haydn and other classical composers dealt with at the time. Up until Beethoven got a hold of a new piano around 1803, all of his music was no more than a 5-octave range, because that is what his instrument limited him to. In some of his later piano works, such as the Opus 111 Sonata, which we are discussing right now, you will notice that the range is incredibly expansive due to his access to a new developed instrument. In that piece, the lowest note is this F sharp, and the highest note is this C flat, making the total range almost 6 octaves wide. After listening to the sonata several times since my homework assignment, I finally worked up the guts to look at the score of all this craziness. Upon seeing the score and briefly trying to struggle my way through sight reading it, the 15 to 16-year-old me was completely blown away by the meters used in the second movement, such as 9/16 or 12/32. Typically, in the classical style, it is very common to see regular, balanced, or symmetrical meters such as 2/4, 4/4, or 6/4, but with Beethoven, it seemed that he was not restricted by any bounds of the classical expectations. Rather, he created his own expectations. The expectations of a normal or regular meter did not stop Beethoven from pouring his own innovation, creativity, or emotions into making any composition of his truly one of a kind. So, was this sincere to him, to alter the expectations of the classical composition style? Well, I certainly believe so. I mean, without Beethoven's ingeniousness within the sonata, we would never have something as futuristic as this excerpt from it. Can you believe that Beethoven wrote that? Remember, this sonata was composed in 1822, a whole 80 years before the ragtime or jazzy style really caught on. Where's Charlie Parker or George Gershwin when you need them? Now, what's more sincere than that? Beethoven reaching into the future, discovering a sound not invented yet, and expanding all boundaries and expectations of the classicist style. I can't help but think this music and these crazy melodies of his within it came directly from Beethoven's heart and soul, especially if predicting something as daring and new as ragtime music. Even though I've never had the chance to properly study this sonata, every time I listen to it, it feels more sincere than anything I could have ever written in that essay when I first discovered the piece. The next section is about virtuosity and technical brilliance versus musical expression. Over the past year, I have been more outgoing about my musical approach to piano with some of my friends, most of whom are non-musicians. Occasionally, I will post a 60-second video of my playing on my Instagram account for all to see. On the social media platform, there's a feature where viewers can like it. They push a button and it tells me whether they enjoy listening to the post or not. Sometimes I post myself playing something quick, and other times I post myself playing something slower and more sensitive. After a couple months of doing this, it quickly came to my attention that I received far more likes on the posts that had faster pieces on them than pieces that were slower and sensitive. I guess in the eyes of non-musicians, whispering a beautiful melody is inferior to playing loud, virtuosic passages. Why is that? How come it is more impressive to people when pianists play fast versus when they play slow and sensitively? It seems to me that today there's a lost love for anyone who can play sensitively on the piano. Whenever I attend a piano recital, either at the Cleveland Institute of Music or at Severance Hall, after it's finished, people around me always say, "Look at how his fingers move, such precision." But it is far less common to hear people say, "Did you hear how he phrased each line?" Or, quote, "The tone he created was utterly breathtaking." It is always the technical brilliance that gets all the talk, leaving the musical expression to go unnoticed. After listening to countless pianists and their performances, the ones that strike me the most aren't the ones where they are running up and down the keys at rapid tempos, but the ones that are so sensitive, calm, and sweet. The ones that seem sincere. What makes a great pianist isn't the speed at which they can play, but rather is the amount of sound and the quality of the sound that they can produce during every moment of any given piece. This brings me to one of my favorite pieces ever composed for the piano, Chopin's Ballade No. 2 in F major. The piece opens with one of the most serene melodies one could think of. It's almost like a dream, but after the dream is finished, a nightmare ensues. Chopin contrasts the beautiful opening melody with virtuosic fury, screaming with struggle and pain. But if this virtuosic passage is played with such sincerity, then it too can be equally as valued as the sensitive opening. Take a listen to the first few pages of the Chopin Ballade No. 2. What makes both of these contrasting sections equally as sincere is the intention we place behind them. It's not about the notes, it's more about the emotional truth that we place in each of the notes and the way we communicate that truth to the audience. I believe it was Leonard Bernstein who said, quote, "Technique is communication. The two words are synonymous in conductors. If you don't communicate, you don't have technique." So, what is the purpose of being able to play at rapid tempos with perfect precision and technique if you cannot successfully communicate something sincere and heartfelt? The next section is 20th and 21st century tonal chaos. It was only in this past year that I've taken a higher liking toward music of the 20th and 21st century. Before then, the only classical music I listened to were by the three Bs, those being Bach, Beethoven, and Brahms. This wasn't because I enjoyed the music of Bach, Beethoven, and Brahms, but simply for the fact that I lacked appreciation for the music of the 20th and 21st century. The reason why I did not enjoy listening to great composers of the 20th and 21st century, such as Prokofiev or Shostakovich or the many other composers, is because I found their music to be ingenuine. For whatever reason, I had suspicions that Prokofiev's use of near key-smashing melodies and Stravinsky's dissonant harmonies covered up any sense of genuine expression. I found their music to be mechanical rather than musical. But it wasn't this mechanical or unmusical feeling that created such an underappreciation for them. Rather, it was simply due to a complete tonal frenzy in which they were surrounded by. You see, as soon as the 20th century struck is when complete tonal chaos of music just simply erupted. At that point, classical music became unpredictable, disorderly, and it mutated into utter tonal chaos. I mean, listen to this Prokofiev piano piece, Opus 12, number 8. I mean, after all that, where's the music? Where's the melody? Certainly no singer would ever want to sing that. But maybe that's the point. To me, it seems like the 20th century music focuses on breaking musical traditions rather than expanding the already pre-existing ones like Mozart or Chopin did, for instance. 20th century music is entirely focused on a means of exploring and creating new sounds. Composers of the 20th century simply experimented with the unknown to harvest something creative in which no one has ever heard before. If you recall our discussion about the Beethoven Opus 111 piano sonata, then you may remember me saying that if you were to play Mozart, Clementi, or Haydn piano pieces, identifying a difference between them would be like being up a creek without a paddle. Now that would be a challenge, but that's besides the point. The point of all this is that the music style during the classical era is very predictable, almost to the point of being identical. Because of this, great composers, which is what they are regardless of their uniformity, like Mozart, Haydn, and Clementi, become interchangeable. There is no radical difference between them. But once you cross the Beethovenian bridge from the classical era to the Romantic era around 1820, the music becomes quite a bit more discernible. For instance, at the start of the era, you have composers such as Chopin and Schumann, who have their own respective styles, their identity, so to speak. But they both strongly adhere to the Romantic style, where the piano becomes a canvas for dynamics, dramatics, human expression, and many other things that indicate the emotional depth of the era. And then later on in this period, you have Gustav Mahler, who would be one of the last artists of the Romantic era, and in my opinion, the one who desperately tried to hold tonality together. I must credit Leonard Bernstein for his extensive outlook on Mahler and his unique theory that Mahler was the final thread of tonality. Bernstein said, within the Unanswered Question lectures, Mahler's Ninth Symphony was his last will and testament, shows that ours is the century of death, and Mahler is its musical prophet. The 9th century embodies three kinds of death: Mahler's own, which he knew was imminent, the death of tonality, which for him meant the death of music itself, and the death of the society, of our Faustian culture, end quote. Mahler's music was a gift to mankind, in that it supplied us with a profound farewell to tonality, and is the last thing desperately trying to hold the Romantic style together before musical chaos ensued. Mahler's last composition, the Ninth Symphony, was composed in 1909, 2 years before his death in 1911. Following his death came composers such as Stravinsky, for example. If you thought Beethoven expanded the traditions of classical music, just wait to hear what this guy did. Ever heard of Stravinsky's Rite of Spring ballet? What you just heard was one of the sections in the Rite of Spring titled Auguries of Spring. That rhythmic, dissonant procession of chords that we call music was written in 1912. Just only a year later would that composition be premiered for the very first time in Paris, France. It completely redefined what early 20th century people thought of the traditional ballet style, as well as reaching into a new era of what would be known as the contemporary era. Stravinsky's Rite of Spring was so unlike anything ever composed before. It was new to the ears of the entire world, which was simply not ready to experience something as brash as what that was. So, what did the French people do while listening to this madness? They started a riot. Just after the first few measures of this music began, the audience began to go mad and started to shout, scream, and fight each other in physical altercations. These outbursts and audience reactions were so loud that the ballet dancers couldn't hear the orchestra, resulting in them being offbeat. The audience learned their manners in the second half, however, and they kept themselves still as they struggled to make it through the rest of the performance. My point in all of this is to question whether this extreme renovation of classical music done by Stravinsky was sincere. Was the Rite of Spring created to reflect Stravinsky's inner voice, or done so solely for the means of musical exploration? In a 1957 interview, Stravinsky was asked, quote, "Why is it that every new work of yours arouses a certain protest in the public?" To which Stravinsky answered, "The answer is very simple. Every time I have new problems, and these new problems require a new approach on my part, and the public has some habits. They already know what my music sounds like. They don't know if it's just a bad work of mine. The idea of new doesn't come to their mind. Inevitably, I am simply guilty of being ahead of the public." After all of that, I believe Stravinsky composed this piece with both motives in mind, to both express his inner voice and to explore the possibilities within music. I believe that both ways can be sincere. Just like we heard in the Chopin Etude earlier, whether it was the version more faithful to the score or the version more faithful to me, they both demonstrated human expression, either the score's or mine. So, what is sincere music? Is it that feeling of sitting in the audience and getting chills from a performer's sublime and creative interpretation of a piece of music? Or is it Mitsuko Ichida putting her soul into every single note she plays written by Mozart? Perhaps it's all of these things. Sincerity does not lie in the fact that Brahms's music has a singing-like tone to them, or that Prokofiev's music is percussive and at times dissonant, but rather it falls in the expression that we, as humans, put into the music. So, to answer my question earlier, whether Arthur Rubinstein's meaningful playing was sincere or not, the answer is yes. No matter where music goes, meaningful playing will always be sincere. So, maybe Leonard Bernstein was right when he said the death of Mahler was the death of tonality itself, but it was nowhere near the death of sincerity. We are all, musicians or not, bound to the responsibility of searching for a sound that resonates within us in the most profound way possible, whether it's through managing a business, educating the young, or playing the piano. We are all trying our best to search for a sound that speaks to all. Reaching for that moment of connection between our craft and our soul. Music, in its sincerest, most immaculate form, will continue to live on forever and ever. Thank you.